Hi, welcome. I'm Pauline from Pauline's Quilters World, and I want to talk to you about the things that I use to get my piece blocks cut out very simply, fast, and then how we get all of our points matching and how we can get our block to come out to the size that it should, because I find one of the most common problems out there is, just for example, a pattern will tell me finish size 12.5 inches. You may get your block made and finished and it measures 12.25. I just want to explain some things that could be going wrong as you're piecing your blocks and just give you some hints and tips. But to start with, this is one of my great tools that I use. This is what we call a 3-in-1 workboard. It's an ironing surface, it's a sandpaper surface, it's a layout surface, and it's a cutting mat. So this is what I basically cut most of my quilts out on, whether I'm cutting out for a big quilt like this one or whether I'm just cutting out small pieces. Just to take you through how I get my fabric onto this and cut it out easy. Here we've got, it's about a yard of fabric. Now I always suggest when you're going to be folding your fabric, always press that centre line out of it that comes when you buy it off the bolt, because I find that's never straight. So I've already pressed this piece. I'm now going to line up my selvages so that I get my selvages aligned. Let the fabric drop and make sure you've got no twists in the fold. You want that fold down the bottom laying nice and flat. Put that on the ironing board and press it to give yourself a new crease line. Then fold again. We're going to fold the selvage right up against the fold so it's all neat and even. Hold it up again and let it drop flat. Now if this was, say, a much bigger length of fabric, I just do about an arm width. That allows me to manage it nicely and the rest will just drop off to the side. Now that piece of fabric folded into 4 fits on our cutting mat perfect. So I don't have to use a long ruler and keep moving my hand across and stretching across the table, because I find that's where we lose control a lot. When I use my rulers, I do all my cutting with this short ruler. It's 12 inches by 6 inches. I don't like the 1/2 inch on the rulers because I get confused. So that there now fits my width of fabric folded into 4. One of the reasons I love to use this ruler, and it's one I've designed myself thinking of all the problems that I was having. Number one, I was having trouble with my ruler slipping. So these are manufactured with a great groove in them. You can hear when I run my fingernail across there, it's engraved into the ruler. So your lines will never wear off. And having this engraved deeply into the ruler, when I put it on my fabric, I don't get the slipping. It grabs to the fabric. The other thing about your ruler that's really, really important, I've found so many rulers over the years that I've bought and invested great money in. Most of them had a really thick line at the inch mark. Then I realised that the 1/2 inch lines were a little bit thinner and the 1/4 inch lines were thinner again. So I was not getting consistency with my measurements. I only have to be 1 thread out on every piece I cut on a block like this. I can lose a whole 1/4 inch in my size. So that's why a lot of our blocks don't turn out the right size. When we manufactured these rulers, the thing I was the most insistent on was that every one of those lines needed to be 1 thread thickness. I didn't want a thick line that if I put 5 rows of thread down and it was covering those lines, that line was too thick for me. I was getting total inaccuracy. So now we're going to trim our edge. Now when I cut, I love to use the little 18mm cutter. Now this shocks a lot of people. But I found when I was cutting strips of fabric, you know, like a lot of times we have to cut 22-inch strips of fabric for some purpose, I found after cutting about 4 strips, my fabric was starting to run off and I'd have to get a new straight edge. And I found as I was cutting with a bigger blade, and you've probably noticed it yourself, as you're cutting, you probably notice your fabric moving forward as the blade rotated. So I worked out the bigger the blade, the bigger the rotation and the more distortion I was getting. And I just found using the tiny little blade, it'll cut through my 4 layers of fabric beautifully, and I get no movement out of that fabric whatsoever. And the other nice thing is, I don't know when we last changed this blade, and we're using it every day here, but I find that from this little black lug that goes in the middle of your blade to the edge of the blade, it's the depth of the ruler. So it's really nearly impossible to run up on the ruler and blunt the blade. So I'm getting a lot longer jeopardy out of my blade because I'm not hitting the side of the ruler. So I've trimmed this edge. Now I want to turn my fabric around, but I don't like turning the fabric. I just put it up on the board. I turn the board. Now I'm ready to cut whatever measurement I want. So I'm going to cut a 4-inch wide strip here. And we'll just cut through. So there we have our cut. Now we can open this out, and I never suggest, and I never do myself, I never use the lines on the board, because the lines on our boards are usually a lot different to the lines on our ruler. And I find if we cut one measurement with the ruler and then just lay our fabric out on here, and now I'm going to use that as my 4-inch guide when I cut it, that's not going to be a perfect square. So don't look at the lines on your board. I wish they'd make them without lines. I'm going to trim off this selvage because I don't like to use those. Then I'll just use the measurement on the ruler to cut my 4-inch wide strip. And then I know that I've got a perfect measurement on all 4 sides. So just go along and cut what you need. And always remember, please don't ever put your rotary cutter down with the blade opened. That's where too many people get a horrible injury. Always close that blade. And a little tip, this cutter here is my favourite because of this shape of this handle. I can get a good grip on it. But we have a little lever at the front and we have a lever at the back. You would only ever touch that lever at the back if you wanted to change your blade. There's no nuts and screws and that to undo. You just pull that down, the blade will fall out. You only ever use the one at the front unless you're ready to change the blade. So now I've got some squares cut out. I've prepared some here. I'm now going to go to my sandpaper board, because what I want to do is I want to mark some stitching lines on these squares to turn them into triangles. And I've found that in the past I used to always draw a line from point to point, and then I'd try and stitch an accurate 1/4 inch out each side. But I found these were starting to not quite be even and the same measurement when I'd got them finished. So that's when I come up with the idea that we need 1/4 and 1/2 square triangle rulers. So we've got all different sizes in the pack. As you can see here, there's 3 different sizes. So you could, if we're doing really, really big triangles, some on this quilt, we've got some bigger triangles, we'd use the bigger rule. They've all got a line through the middle. So this arrow head here at the point is going to go right into one of my right angle corners. Then the line that runs through the middle should sit right on this point. If it doesn't, you know that's not a true square. Put that down. Now, because I'm using the sandpaper, I'm not going to get any stretching when I draw my stitching lines. So that's what I'm going to do now, is draw a line. And I always use the Bohin marking pencil because I find it's a pencil that'll come out of any fabric. It's just beautiful to use. So draw a line on both sides, and you notice that my fabric's not stretching. If I did that on the tabletop as I drew, this fabric's going to move and stretch, which puts me out in my measurement. So now we've got our drawn line. So we're going to go and stitch on that line now. So magically we've got that done. We've stitched the lines. You can see the stitching line. Now I'll come back to my cutting mat. And this is why I love this little mat, because I use it at my sewing machine all the time. Now I can put any one of my rulers back on there, and this is where I love to use this little ruler. This is the handiest little ruler. It's 2.5 by 8.5. And once again, it's got the engraving in it, so it's not going to slip. Every line is exactly the same thickness as the lines on here. If I put any three of my tools together to use them in a set, every measurement measures the same. So if you've got a set of tools at home and you want to interact them in the making of one block or a quilt, please make sure all of your measurements on every ruler measure the same. If not, use one. Otherwise you're going to end up with points not meeting. And it's all about getting a block made like this and having your 1/4 inch perfect all the way around and not have to do any adjustment, and getting all of these points to match perfect. So now we'll just trim this little one. So I'll put the 1/4 inch line of this ruler on the stitching line, and now I'll cut through. So there's my pieces. Now a little tip with pressing, come back to our pressing mat. I always press the stitching line on both sides because a lot of our threads can stretch. Put the dark fabric onto the ironing surface, the light fabric onto the ironing surface, and press back. And this is why I love this mini iron. If you don't have a mini iron, you don't know what you're missing. They are fantastic. And if you noticed here, I've got it sitting on a silicone mat. This is what's called a trivet. Now, I find if I leave my iron standing up, because it draws minimal power, it doesn't retain its heat. And it's a little bit unsafe standing up because I could quite easily knock it with my arm. But if I leave it laying down, every time I pick it up, it is as hot as a normal iron. It's got a regulator on it to change the heat setting, and you can always put steam in. Open this little hot plug here, pour water in it, push this button, and then you'll have it on steam. But I usually always do mine with a dry iron. So we'll press this one. Oops, set the stitching line first. And I'll just give you a little hint on pinning your seams so that you can get them to nest in really nice and easy. Now when we put these together, because we've got the seams going in opposite directions, they're going to nest nice and neat into each other. Our squares are measuring exactly the same size. There's been no stretching because of the tools I've used and the way I've pressed. I find if I put a regular pin up this seam or one either side, I get movement. But if I use the wonderful, I don't know whether you can see this here, the wonderful double fork pin, just nest that seam. Now this pin is very flexible, so you can leave it as normal. It's got a little lip here, easy to hold. I'm going to pin from the inside of the fabric to the outside, not from the outside in. Now you can flex this pin in if you want to go nice and close and get that, so one side of the pin goes on either side of the stitching line. And there you've got a perfect point. It will come out absolutely spot on for you. You can sew over the pin, but what I do is I put the pin down a little bit further down the seam, and I only take a little bite, little tiny bite. That keeps it nice and accurate. Now I can sew down over the tip of that pin, and I've never broken a needle. So they're the pins I use. It's the cutter I use. It's the rulers, 2 rulers is all I use, and then I use these 1/2 and 1/4 square triangle rulers. And you know, you can use these rulers to do circles. If you want to measure that your 1/4 inch foot on your machine is exactly the same measurement as this, put this under the foot of on the bed of your machine, put the needle in the middle position and put it in the middle of that hole. Have your 1/4 inch foot on your machine, and your 1/4 inch foot should line up exactly there. If it doesn't, move your needle position so it does. Then you've got a spot on 1/4 inch seam. The mini iron and the trivet, and I love the bowhin marking pen because I know that if I draw on a fabric, it will always erase out. It comes with 2 sets of lead, black and white. Now if I want to change and mark a dark coloured fabric now, I need the light lead. Click down the top, I'm holding the top down, I'm pulling the lead out through the front. Now I'll click down the white lead, And oops, another black one come. There should be a white one in here too. Click down the white lead, and now I can mark onto my dark fabrics, and I can see those lines. Then I would put the black lead straight back in and put it on. When I want to get rid of the white, pull it out, put it back in, click down the black lead. It's got the lovely eraser on it, and a lot of people forget this eraser winds up. So there's lots of eraser there. So that's my most favourite marking pen. So I would like you to try some of the things I've showed you, some of the little tips, because I'd love you to be able to make a quilt like this and you not have to unpick a point. You're going to get all your points perfectly even every time if your tools measure the right measurement. And try cutting on a small board. It will save you so much time and you'll be so much more accurate. Go to our website. Look at the videos. Go to our YouTube channel, look at the videos. If you're on our YouTube channel, please hit the bell, because you will then get a notification when we put up a new video for you. On our website, we have lots of information, lots of our wonderful tools, and our website address is www.pqw.com.au. Have fun and enjoy, and happy piecing!